time, the classification systems or the definitions of how a learning disorder or a childhood learning disorder is described has changed several times. When something changes several times, that means our understanding of it is still thin. And therefore, listening to experts who are actually people with lived experiences is probably going to be the way forward. So currently, how it is described is that anything. So what is learning? Learning is everything that a baby, and as they grow up, learns. So is there any human being who does not have the capacity to learn? Wrong. Everyone has the capacity to learn. What are learning disorders in terms of definition by scientists who have tried to define it in a narrow way? They are talking about acquired learning. Learning skills which, like you said, are not natural or innate in us. These are acquired skills which only happen after a certain age, where learning is delivered to a child in a structured way. इसका मतलब मेरा ये है कि बोलना किसी ने आपको नहीं सिखाया, चलना किसी ने नहीं सिखाया. ट्राई हम बहुत करते हैं, लेकिन बच्चा तभी चलता है, तभी बोलता है जब उसका समय आता है. और हर बच्चे का एक रेंज होता है. इसमें आप ये नहीं कह सकते आई हैव टॉट माय चाइल्ड टू वॉक. दीज आर इनेट स्किल्स. Yes, there will be certain children where we may need to teach them. But there are certain skills, like you said, which are not natural. आप किताब देख के अपने आप पढ़ना नहीं सीख जाते हैं. ये सिखाना पड़ता है. This is something where learning or the ingredients of what goes into learning, an acquired skill like reading, writing or arithmetic. So इस चीज को अगर हम learning मानते हैं, acquired learning वाली बात जो है, इसको पकड़ के अगर हम चलें, तो लर्निंग डिसऑर्डर्स को यहाँ पे डिफाइन किया गया है कि कोई भी ऐसी चीज, एनीथिंग दैट इम्पैक्ट्स द एबिलिटी टू लर्न द एक्वायर्ड स्किल्स. एंड इट इज नॉट अबाउट आई रिपीट, मोटिवेशन और इंटेलिजेंस. दीज थिंग्स आर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट जब हम डिफाइन करते हैं. ये इंटेलिजेंस से बिल्कुल कोई कंसर्न नहीं रखता है. और सेकेंडली, इट इज नॉट अबाउट कि बच्चा सीखना नहीं चाह रहा है. बच्चा सीखना चाहता है और उसके बावजूद वो सीख नहीं पा रहा, या तो उसकी स्पीड उतनी नहीं है सीखने की, और या फिर सीखने की एबिलिटी में कोई फर्क है. इस चीज को इवेंचुअली हम लोग लर्निंग डिसऑर्डर्स इस समय डिफाइन करते हैं. दिस इज नॉट हाउ इट वाज डिफाइंड अ फ्यू इयर्स अगो. इट वाज नॉट हाउ इट वाज डिफाइंड 20 years ago, and it is still not how it is socially defined. This is only in the books. So बहुत सारी बातें मैंने कह दी हैं, लेकिन definitions in terms of words are available online in today's world. अगर आप टाइप इन करेंगे childhood learning disorders और उसके आगे या DSM-5 लिखें, जो कि एक क्राइटेरिया है, अमेरिकन क्राइटेरिया है टू डिफाइन इट, उसमें बहुत स्पेसिफिक क्राइटेरिया आ जाते हैं, कोई भी पढ़ सकता है. और एक ICD-10 है, which is the International Classification of Diseases, version 10. Again, I will say, if anything has a 10th version, that means we are still learning about it. And it is proposed to have an 11th version very soon, which means अगर हमने 11 बार definition change की है किसी चीज की, तो अभी हम सीख रहे हैं. So we are also learning disordered in many ways, in that we propose certain criteria till we know better. So इस समय मेरी understanding यहीं पे आती है कि बहुत सारे ऐसे ingredients हैं जिनसे acquired learning abilities related होती हैं.
So the bottom line is that, please carry on.
So just 2 points to underline. One is it is about acquired skills of what we call academics and the educational structured system. That's how it started. However, learning in itself, जैसे आपको अगर साइकिल चलानी है, इसमें किताब की जरूरत नहीं है, या आपको पेड़ पे चढ़ना है, it is not necessary to have a book or a manual to read it from. So there are many kinds of intelligences in the world, and human beings are capable of many varieties of intelligences. So this is not about intelligence. The term is a little bit of a misnomer, which is why there is a lot of confusion around it.
Good. So, so the point highlighted here is that we as adults are also learning, because our knowledge and our information is actually changing every day. We are evolving. So it's better to not get bogged down by the age-old prejudices and ideas about learning abilities or disabilities. So Himani, can you just classify for us that what are the different types of conditions which are taken as learning disorders? You can unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So as the discussion is really going very interesting, and Dr. Kavita has already said that we are all learning about what learning disorders are. Similarly, the second confusion is that these days learning disorders or learning disabilities are again, the word is used mostly for specific learning difficulties. But if we look at the bigger perspective of it, I would say that the learning disorders would include anything which is interfering in the learning of a child, which can be related to our senses. Like if we cannot see clearly, we may not be able to achieve or be able to gather these skills. If we cannot hear, if we are hearing impaired, again we cannot learn. Acquired learning cannot happen, or even naturally also we cannot learn. So it starts from actually the senses, and then there can be certain as our audiences would also know, certain neurodevelopmental conditions which can interfere in the learning of a child. It could be an intellectual disability, it could be an autism spectrum disorder, it could be an ADHD, attention inattention hyperactivity disorder, and then there can be specific learning difficulties. So these are the various neurodevelopmental conditions which can actually interfere in the learning. But lot of times, in today's time especially, the learning disorders or learning disability is being also used for specific learning difficulties. So now what are the specific learning difficulties? So when we talk of specific learning difficulty, it is somewhere where the intelligence of a child, as already said, is not impaired. The intelligence is normal for the child. But the child is having difficulties with, specifically with reading, which we also call as dyslexia, with writing, which we call as dysgraphia, and with mathematical calculation, which we call as dyscalculia. So, and there can be some associated visual processing, auditory processing, and the memory issues. Then there could be some associated developmental conditions. And there are a huge list, as Dr. Kavita said, that there's a DSM classification of disorders, which has a huge list of various causes, neurodevelopmental causes, which can interfere in the learning of a child. But yes, if we want to talk about specific learning difficulties, then we should use the term, I guess, specific learning difficulties more than using a general term as learning difficulty.
So yes, you pointed out very rightly that, what you were trying to say is, see, our human body is like a computer. It has got 5 ways of inputting information: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the touch. The 5 senses are the ways or the channels through which the information goes inside. Yeah. If the input is impaired, suppose the child cannot see very, very clearly, or a child cannot hear properly, so then the information is not reaching the brain. So the learning may be impaired. This is one form of difficulties that one may face. Yes, these are very, very real things, and they actually happen. But when all these 5 senses are normal and all the information going is in normally, how that information is processed, analyzed, interpreted, stored, and used to reproduce things is what is actually meant by the learning that we classically refer to. And that may vary from person to person. One person may get more information through the eyes, other may get more from the ears, somebody may get more from the touch, so that varies. So there's a difference. It does not mean that one person is better than the other. If a fish cannot run on the ground, does not make her or him any inferior. If a cow cannot fly in the air, is no inferior than the birds, or vice versa. No? So there may be differences, no? And those differences have been sadly labeled as disorders, as dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. But we need to actually go above this, shake off these prejudices, and not call them as disorders or disabilities. Even so, yeah, these are not. Now, you mentioned about ADHD. Now, let me just again play devil's advocate. Have you seen little monkeys out in the wild? Have you seen little animals out in the wild? Do you expect the little monkeys to sit still in the Buddha pose and meditate? No. You only expect them to be jumping around, playing around. If they were not doing that, that would be abnormal. Then why should you expect a young child, a human child, to sit still in one place, sit in the chair in the classroom, look at the whiteboard, not utter a word, not make move, and write and say, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. It is simply not possible. It is not natural. Yes, Kavita, please come. Yes, yes, Kavita, come in.
So I think I completely agree with what you're saying, Sanjay, that this is a social problem. It's a problem with the social construct of how we view education, what kind of value we put on a child who is unable to learn in a conventional way that we have derived. But alongside that, I would like to say one more thing, and that is that some of the things that we are pointing towards, the reason why this entire conversation is happening is also existing.
Yeah.
There are children who do not manage or are not going to be able to cope with this kind of learning. It does not mean that they are not intelligent or not motivated or are not going to be able to learn anything. They will. However, the reality of the world today is that there is a conventional education system which usually happens in a broad way inside a classroom with, I mean, not in COVID times, but a group and the education is delivered by a single or singular adult. It's a very specific structured way of learning. And while it is counterintuitive to most ages of children, this is the reality. And children who are not able to integrate with that are marginalized. And this is a social problem.
Yeah.
However, there is often a specific learning disorder or a sort of disorder. Now, this has always been the problem, how to balance both so that the children who deserve and can get the help to integrate much better with the social structures without necessarily being disrespectful to them, without necessarily making them feel inadequate. But yet they may require some help and they may wish for that help if they knew what kind of help they wanted, if they knew it was available. So I'm just trying to say that I'm playing the devil's advocate from the other side as well.
Yes, yeah.
And I would really like that we balance the two views.
Correct, yes. So yes, I was also coming to that point that fine. Having said that, what I said, there are extreme cases where things may actually be problematic and which need support, need help, need thing, So that is where, so we should not, so ADHD, don't take it as an abnormality or a disease. Take it as, okay, fine, this is a behavior, kind of behavior. If it becomes too extreme, maybe it needs some support, some moderation kind of thing. But ADHD does not mean the child is abnormal, because a child was not designed to sit still on a chair for 5 hours in a day in the school. We were not designed like the child was designed to play out in the field, in the jungles, run around. Gunjan, I'll call you in for your views on, say broadly on the this aspect that, when do you say it is abnormal and when do you say, okay, fine, it is normal, but it's in a normal range,
With now we having better vocabulary for special needs. And we are, like Dr. Kavita said, that we are learning every day, we are learning. But yes, when it comes to a classroom, so when we look at the education part, especially children with ADHD, they become, it is difficult to manage them in the classroom for the teachers. And the constant complaints that the parents keep hearing, that the child also keeps internalizing, that I am odd. There's something wrong with me, and the lack of sensitivity in the social construct. So that adds to a lot of problems, and that's when the behavior disorder also starts. Like the children start to act out, they start to bully, or they become aggressive because they also don't know how to fit in. So while they are trying to fit in, while they are trying to change the labeling that is coming on them, कि मुझे बदमाश बोल लो, मुझे naughty बोल दो, लेकिन मुझे बेवकूफ मत बोलो. So one really doesn't know that, why the behavior is coming. But yes, children with ADHD, children with ASD, there is a lot of labeling and there's a lot of difficulty in the classroom setup for the teachers also, considering our population is huge. And, and also for parents, my child has to fit in. So even the awareness in parents is very limited. Like I had this parent who said that when I got the diagnosis of my child, for the first time ASD, she's saying I couldn't get up from the bed for 3 days. So it hits them hard that my child is different, and why does this happen to me? And so many of them, they go into a denial. Like, we have the parents sitting in front of us, they will say everything else, they'll tell us all the symptoms, but they won't say the word autism from their mouth. Kuch bhi bolo, ye mat bolo. So yes, there is a social stigma, there is a taboo still there. And, forums like these, I'm hoping will get more awareness and will help these children.
So my point also is the same, that, what we're doing, that when we do not understand that how we were designed, how we were supposed to function, and we try to fit the child in a certain expected behavior, when the child does not fit in, we actually create an environment where the child becomes abnormal, because we tell them that you're abnormal. You're not normal. You have to behave like X, Y, and Z. Whereas the child may be totally different person altogether. So we should not do that. We need to understand that, yes, there's a range of normal behavior. One child may sit idly still, very peaceful like a Buddha. And on the other extreme, the child may not sit still at all. So we should accept that range. Yes, there are people who fall outside this range. There's a typical thing of plus minus 2 standard deviation. So 98.5% of people fall within the bell curve, 2.5 fall outside the curve, they are taken as a normal. But if your child is falling within the bell curve, even if it's at the other end, on one end of the bell curve, don't take the child as abnormal. Mani wants to say something.
Yeah.
Please.
So the word abnormal is not the right word I feel to use here. So every child, what I tell the parents that visit me, that every child is going to learn differently. No two children are going to be same. Whether you call them typically developing or not typically developing, but no two children are same. So every child develops differently. Every child will learn differently. And I think it's on us adults to stop using the word abnormal. Let's start using other vocabulary. Let's change the vocabulary so that the society becomes more accepting. The parents become more accepting of the fact that their child may learn differently, but it is all right. And let's not call them abnormal, I feel so.
Okay, in the question of the vocabulary has changed at least, I think, 3-4 times over the past few decades now.
Yeah.
It was one point of time, it's called disability. Yeah. It is called disorder, and now it's called differences. But practically speaking, has the changing vocabulary made any difference on the ground? No, because our expectations have not changed. Our learning methodology, teaching methodologies has not changed. Our school system has not changed. We have not been able to broaden the style of teaching. हमने एक साइज के कपड़े बना दिए हैं, सभी बच्चों को वो कपड़े दे दिए हैं, इसमें आप फिट हो जाओ. कुछ लोगों को बड़े बढ़िया फिट आएंगे because they are average build, they look very nice now. But there will be one who will be looking like scarecrow, and there will be others who will tear the kitong, and there will be some extremes who will go nanga completely. The one who are going nanga will always feel abnormal no matter what vocabulary we use for that. So it is not the question of the vocabulary or the terminology of the words. It's how are we making those kids feel? Are we making those kids feel normal? Are we making their parents feel normal or not, is what is more important now. So what causes these so-called learning disorders or disabilities, Kavita?
So the flat, blunt answer is we don't know. So taking from what you have said, Dr. Sanjay, diversity is the human condition. It's the truth. Acceptance of diversity is not reality right now for us. And this is true not just for children, it is true for adults. It is true not just for the wiring that we all have inside us, and therefore the outcome is different. It is true for almost everything in life. The truth is, diversity versus conforming and belonging is the broader problem in humankind. There is an urge in all of us to belong to something and therefore to conform. And there is the sense of uniqueness, which is what naturally we are. Each person is unique. Even twins are not the same with each other, although their genetic makeup may be very similar. Now, balancing these two again, these are counter drives. Children themselves wish to belong. because the story they carry within themselves as they grow up is, and this is a story which is fed by the social circle around them, that that learning is very important, education is very important. So there is a certain class of Indians, of us, I also grew up in such a family, where the weightage or value of having a good education is very high. It is over and above par to everything else. You can be kind or unkind, you can lie or not lie, you can be good to animals or not good to animals, you can be a good swimmer, you can be a bad pianist, but if you are okay in education, you get by. This is where what you are talking about, the stories we carry about ourselves, about what is valuable. And who is accountable for that? The child who's born into this world is not accountable for that. And that is what I think you were trying to highlight. What is the cause of this? I would rather not say that the neurodevelopmental wiring is the cause of this. The cause is a biopsychosocial cause of what the manifest looks like. The manifest, or the consequence of having a difference inside me, is very different to having the difference inside me but living in the forest as an either Adivasi or an Aboriginal, where education and direct English colonial system of education is not even important. It is not valuable. Will we be picking up specific learning disorders or autism over there or treating them? Possibly not. So I think what I'm trying to highlight is that while science tries to find out what's inside the individual and call that the cause, in something like the condition of learning disorders or childhood onset specific learning disorders or other disorders or conditions that impact acquired learning, that's not true. There is a biological, there are psychological, there are social factors. So it's a biopsychosocial construct, according to me, in terms of causation. Part of it is the social construct of what is important and what the child's outcome needs to be, what a good child or a successful child needs to look like, what a good successful mother needs to feel like to have a good successful child. So that social construct is very important. What a teacher will say in a class to the person who's the backbencher and often at the end of the class in terms of marks. What will the school say to them? What is the story the child is carrying inside? So that's the social construct. Second part is the psychological construct. So I am growing up in a place where actually everyone says, if you're good in studies, you're good in everything. Being a good student equals being a good person. So everything else is shadowed and invisible. This is the one thing that's important. Now, if I can't do that due to X number of causes, then I'm a failure. This is the psychological story I carry about myself as an individual with respect to the rest of society that I am in. And if I'm intelligent and I see that in a class of 25 other children of my age, all of them are being able to do it, and I am not, then the story that starts building inside me is that I'm odd or I'm different. I am less, I am inadequate. And that will lead me towards certain kinds of acting out behaviors or withdrawal or carrying that psychological story inside myself, which is singular in nature, only one story about myself. Not that I'm a good dancer, good poet, good painter, and maybe I don't like math very much or I can't do math very well, but the story of I'm not a good student becomes pervasive, and that in itself can lead to psychological consequences. Some people emerge from it also. I'm not saying all of it is bad. In some people, it causes a huge amount of resilience. And that is why we have forums like this eventually that you are conducting. And the third part and the third component is the biological component, which people call neurodevelopmental condition, which means this is not in the child's hand anyway. This is something that is in your genetic makeup and in the way the brain is constructing itself based on the psyche as well as the social this thing, but also based on the DNA and blueprint that you have received from your ancestors by chance. And therefore the construction of your wiring may not lead you to become someone who finds it easy to learn arithmetic or spelling or reading or coordination of your own body or knowing right from left in a natural way, or being able to concentrate in. So all these ingredients can be part of the wiring as well. Now, in a micro level managed way, if we only look at the wiring, the problem becomes that we fix the problem in the child and we say, therefore, the child has to be remedied. But if we zoom out even a little bit, we realize that's not true. Because if we believe the biopsychosocial causation, then it is not about the child only.
Correct. That's very rightly put, that, you know, the psychosocial thing is a very, very important thing. And of course, biology is important too. And yes, there may be something wrong in the biology, but we should also know that the psychosocial construct is also not the ideal one that we have these days. No, we assess a child by academic performance, by, let's say, we measure a child by marks he obtains. And then later on in life, we measure a man by the money he earns. No? And we say, then we say, no, why should we measure a child by man by money he earns? It is wrong. It is, no, it's not. You should look at the human value. In the childhood, you were measuring your kids, you know, or you were still measuring your kids by the marks that they're earning. You know. So both are wrong parameters. You know, should assess a human for the human values and attributes. You know. Coming to the biological aspect, Dr. Himani, are there any physical or structural defects seen functional MRI in children who show these learning problems and all?
So they, as we've already been talking about, that we are still learning. Yes, they are doing a lot of research. They are trying to do functional MRIs and find out if the metabolic activity or the perfusion in certain areas of the brain is impaired, adequate, or there is a mismatch, or there is a difference from typically developing children. So they have observed some, especially in children with specific learning difficulty. They have, we all know as doctors or as professionals that we have a Broca's area in the brain, which is in the left hemisphere, which helps us with our reading skills. And there are certain other areas in the parieto-temporal region or in certain parts of the brain, which helps us with our reading and writing skills. So certain functional MRI studies they have done, which they have shown that the metabolic activity in those areas or the perfusion in those areas is a little different and less as compared to the other children. But again, that's not a way to diagnose. That's very important for all of us to know. It's just the research that they're trying to pinpoint, but it doesn't mean if a child has a specific learning difficulty, then you need to, that child needs to undergo MRI. That is not something that we want to convey. It's more of a research, and they are trying to figure out how we can help or improve or maybe manage these conditions at a biological level. That's why the research is going on in these areas. So that's how I would put it as far as the biological cause is concerned.
Gunjan, tell me that what do these kids experience, you know, and what do the parents experience? You know, you deal with them day in, day out, you know, and what is their experience, you know, as a child when they have these basic learning difficulties, you know, and what do the parents experience?
Embarrassment, primarily. Yeah, they feel singled out, and they have trouble expressing their feelings, children especially. And they also have trouble calming themselves down. Like they also don't understand that, you know, why these meltdowns are happening and why they are behaving in a certain way. Definitely low self-esteem follows because of the construct and because what they have been exposed to and what they've been, you know, internalizing and what they have actually believed about themselves. They feel isolated and they definitely run into behavior problems. And parents specifically, they go from those stages of pain, that is first from denial to acceptance. It takes time for them to ultimately, agree with the problem and then start to work with it. So that is what they're experiencing, and they also feel little outcast, and they avoid it. They avoid to get a diagnosis. They avoid, that the child goes to the special class in the school. So yeah, the parents do try to fight it out till the time the acceptance sets in. When it comes to functional difficulty, yes, reading, writing, they are facing a problem with that. And like if you give them too many instructions, In classroom, we see that, if the teacher says, take out your science book, page number so-and-so, paragraph so-and-so, so they will not be able to, put the sequence and understand what has to be done. And since they understand that, ye to main kar hi nahi paunga, so might as well I start poking the kid next to me. And so I don't get singled out about it. And they have problem in visual perception skills. So their ability to, also play in the playground at times is affected, to be a part of the group and to understand, how a game is to be played. And so even socially, they have difficulty. And like problem in sequencing. So in their day-to-day working also, they have a problem. So the psychological hit is definitely more, and it's harder for them to cope with that.
Kavita, how do the parents and teachers, how can they identify and how can you diagnose these conditions both qualitatively and quantitatively?
So just to add to what Gunjan is saying before I answer this question, Dr. Sanjay, the most common thing that I find when I deal with parents or families is confusion. Is the confusion about my child looks all right, can understand most things. बाकी सब कुछ तो ठीक करते हैं, समझते सब कुछ हैं, तो ये क्यों नहीं कर पा रहे? So that part is it's absolutely confusing. How is it even possible that such an intelligent, otherwise able child cannot do this simple thing? So just wanted to sort of add to that. And then coming to the question that you're asking, what are some of the things that we can pick up on? So at different ages, in terms of qualitatively, so I'm not the person who does the standardized test. It's usually psychologists who are qualified and trained to do standardized testing. But prior to standardized testing, so there are two aspects of this. First of all, what are the concerns that the child has? Usually it comes from either the teachers who in a school are more able to figure out what an average that kind of a child, so 7-year-old, because they've seen hundreds of 7-year-olds in their time. So they are usually able to pick up that this particular child is not being able to be or do things in a certain way. Many parents are not able to see that because it's their first child, sometimes it's their second child, and they don't know in what way acquisition of these skills may need to follow. So, and many of these children, when they spend one-on-one time at home, they are able to have more of a skill set and more of a performance than when they're doing it in school in a group of 20, 30 children. Due to all these reasons, sometimes the parents will see this a bit later, and the teacher may be the person who actually picks up that this child is not being able to do some of the things. So what are some of the things that they come in with? Usually in my practice, I find performance as one of the main criteria that parents bring in, that the child is not doing well in tests. What does that mean? That means that only when the tests start. So in our education system, in the urban areas, there's a certain age by which the test is starting. So most of them will pick it up at that point of time कि performance में problem आ रही है. Second, usually is because many of Indian parents or middle class parents are involved in the preparation for the test. So the mother or the father will say, कल रात को पढ़ाया था, बिल्कुल आराम से बता पा रहे थे, लेकिन actually test में जब गए तो पता नहीं क्या हुआ, he has got 3 out of 20. These are some of the things, the gaps between the learning at home, and the performance at school. These are two of the things that they bring up. Other things that often will come as concern is when a parent has got, for example, a second child or has some experience with cousins or others, they say कि पढ़ने में मुश्किल हो रही है. The child is not being able to read or grasp. So the reading difficulties, which are at a much earlier age, that they are not picking up the letters, the numbers, are not being able to identify them, that's at a much earlier age. And that's fewer children, but it's starting to happen now that they do pick that up. Even in preschool, some of the teachers pick it up. Some of them will have the classical sign of writing letters ulta. So the shape of the letter, the 7 may not be like this, it may be like this. The D may not be like this, it may be the other side. It may be ulta. They may not be writing between the lines when they are starting, or they're not being able to pay attention in classroom, or very few, but nowadays that's also happening. Parents are being able to say, my child is not being able to figure out how to catch or throw a ball. They don't anticipate. They can't pick up. That's the other part. They can't pick up and write. So one of the pre-skills towards education is also starting to scribble. So scribbling in itself, that my child is not being able to draw a shape, can't do a circle, can't do a triangle, cannot start writing, or their grip is not okay. Some of the children will keep holding like this and will not graduate to a tripod grip. These are some of the things which are the prerequisite skills towards academics that parents will pick up. And qualitatively, these are the screening instruments, screening part. So qualitatively, when we try to do what is called a diagnosis, we first have to see whether these concerns are arising from something like lack of opportunity. Yeah, so it could be that the child is the first English speaking or English medium going person in the family. When he comes back home, everybody's speaking in Hindi, and therefore he's having a problem in actually applying English, even in speaking skills as well as in reading, writing. In this case, it may not actually be a learning disorder which is responsible from the biological point of view. It could just be the social issue. So then we have to start narrowing down that this manifest, which looks like a learning disorder, what could the cause be? And then we have to start screening for causes. That is still not a diagnosis. Once we screen all these psychological and social parts away, then we do standardized testing, which actually will bring out whether there is a lack of ability to apply. And that standardized testing will lead you towards the diagnosis, which is more a biological diagnosis of either a learning disorder or a condition that may be impacting the learning. So it may not be a specific learning disorder, but it may be that the child has attentional difficulties or ADHD, and that is impacting his actual learning, and that's looking like he's got a learning disorder. Or it may be comorbid, it may be together. There may be an attention deficit disorder alongside a specific learning disorder as well. Or there may be autism where the child is not even understanding the concept of why should I be learning in school? So I am not paying attention, and therefore this acquired learning is not happening. But that doesn't mean they have an inability to do that learning. It's actually because they're not understanding the social context, and therefore they are not paying attention. So the process is of figuring out concerns, then trying to do the screening, and then doing a standardized test, which may look different for these 3 or 4 different categories of learning disorders.
So when should this testing be done, and who should be doing this testing, and when should we label the child?
So those are very interesting questions. I think these tests are not available everywhere. That's one. So if you look at all of India, testing facilities in terms of standardized diagnostic tests are not necessarily available all over India. So when we should be doing it right now is fairly fragmented. We do it when somebody approaches us. It's as microscopic as that. When the parents or the onus is entirely on the family, in India, there is no other way of doing this. If the parent is convinced that something needs to be done, they will bring the child to a person who is an expert in these. It could be a pediatrician like Himani. It could be a special educator straight away. Often it is the teachers in schools who pick it up, and they may tell the parent to take, but even so, the onus is still on the parent. And when the parent brings the child to us, then we try and see whether there is or possibly a biological component, whether we need to do screening for the emotional component, whether the child is coming at age 12 or 13 or even 16 sometimes, where the actual emotional component, the consequence of having a learning disorder has had its impact. The child has grown up with the story, I am different, I'm inadequate, and therefore has withdrawn and is coming to us at a time with depression and anxiety. And actually that's overshadowing the entire picture of what has happened in the 16 years of their life. And then we may need to first look at the depression and then do the detective work of finding out longitudinally that actually it arose from there. And that's when we do it. So at different ages, the way we screen and why we screen and where we go looks very different. But in my practice, we only do it when somebody approaches us. And I think that's a very small way of doing it, but That's
So
where.
what is your recommendation for parents now? Himani, you can tell that now. What are the recommendations for parents? When should parents actually go for these tests and evaluations?
So I would say that we can actually incorporate some kind of a screening procedure in schools also. So for specific learning difficulties, we can have screening. We have 2 screening tools, which are designed in different languages also now. So what happens in India is, because there is different languages being spoken in different states, they are having challenge in executing a certain learning disability screening tool. So we have now research like we have a DALI screening tool, and we have Samniman screening tool also, which can be incorporated, or which can be a part of a routine screening for children. So we have a level 1 screening, which can be done for children from 5 to 7 years of age, which I think if we start executing those screening in school itself, it will be much more easier to figure out for the teachers. Because if we look at the prevalence and the amount of the prevalence of these conditions, somewhere close to 10% to 15% that the children may face these problems. So if we screen early between 5 to 7 years, and then the second level screening happens between 8 to 12 years of age, if we have guidelines and the government puts those into action, then there is a possibility that we can actually help children much earlier. And I think we are going to talk about early intervention, because when we work at remediating or teaching in a way that the child is going to learn, the child is going to cope up. A lot of them can cope up, and they can perform as the other children are, and they learn. The more important thing is, we as society are wanting them to learn, to read and to write, and then they are able to grab those skills much earlier when we start working on them early on. So it's now the onus is on us to bring awareness, to have some kind of a system in place, and have the screenings initiated. So if the schools come forward and they agree to having a process of screening for children, I think it will be of immense help in finding out and sieving out children with any kind of difference, and then maybe help them at the right time.
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that all the teachers, when they do their B.Ed, they are taught about these problems and how to recognize them and how to find them out now. And I think the teachers, if they actually use that learning, can actually pick up these things very, very soon. Am I right? Am I wrong? What are your views on this?
Yeah. Is that me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Gunjan, let you finish first, and then I'll make a comment on that.
All right. So yes, in B.Ed they are taught, but even the requirement from government is to be a special educator from RCI, and now there is pressure on schools to have special educators from RCI. But in terms of how much skills do they actually have to be working with children is still under question, because the certification they managed to get, but whether they are still having that kind of having those kind of skills to work with children is under question. And when you were talking about labeling, I wanted to add that you can screen very early. Like for children with ASD, we start screening anytime after 2 years, 1.5 saal, 2 saal, say the parents come up with their concerns. Screening can start early. However, labeling is done at the age of 6 years, even from government point of view. And there are a lot of ADHD tests and dyslexia tests you cannot even do below 6 years. When it comes to certification, the child has to be 9 years. So that is what I wanted to add. And from government point of view, it is still called disability, specific learning disability.
Okay.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think the pediatrician, the developmental pediatrician, and the Indian Academy of Pediatrics is still putting applications and asking government not to give a certificate of mental retardation for children with learning disability, because a lot of times when they go for certification, they are the category of specific learning difficulty has been put into a very wrong segment. So they are still working at separating it, because these children do not have intellectual disability. So that is a change that we also need to make in our constitution and the way we give disability certificate.
Yeah, so this is exactly my objection also. This is the problem with our society, that how we understand these things, how we look at these things, and what we expect from the kids, And forums like this, discussion like this, are basically to make people aware that most of these things are not abnormal. Yes, there are some cases, especially like autism and all, which you may say, okay, fine, this is outside the normal range, But most of the learning disabilities that are being talked about now, whether it's dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, they are not really abnormal. They are variations, or variation styles, a different style of learning. So now coming to more important thing, that how to help these children, starting with Gunjan.
Acceptance. So we start with acceptance, and सबसे पहले parental acceptance. So once the parents accept that, my child has this difficulty, and psycho-educating themselves. Like we tell the parents, आपको सारे disorders नहीं जानने, आपको सारे difficulties नहीं जानने, आपको सिर्फ अपने बच्चे की problem जाननी है. You just have to learn one thing, and then you at home can be, you can sensitize the environment. You can accordingly create tools to help your child with your child's difficulty. So that I would say is very, very important, because at the end, it is parents who are going to be most of the time with their children. And a lot of support system also comes from the parents. Then special educations is required most of the time, because we use multisensory approach, whether the child is a visual learner, auditory learner, a tactile, or a kinesthetic learner. So we design, their education and their learning skills based on one of these learning abilities that they have. Then of course occupation therapy helps a lot, and a lot of schools nowadays are having occupation therapy provided in the schools, and they're called therapy centers. So earlier they were called the special sections, but now they call it as therapy centers, like Vasant Valley and all. They have these centers with them, in which their cognitive and sensory skills, visual perception skills, so that they become more functional and more independent as children and in their workplaces. Behavior therapy is recommended, where children, because of the psychological input that they have as children, so behavior therapy really works. We do creative art therapy, we do dance movement psychotherapy, and play and language therapies also. So various kinds of therapies interwoven with special education is what is the overall, or you can say the broader recipe for helping these children. Yes, Dr. Himani.
Himani, yes.
I have a small comment to make here. We do all this, again, we are offering a recipe of differentiating them in some way or the other. So if we want to really change the world, if we really want to bring a change, I think, as you said, in B.Ed, it's not included. I don't think regular teachers are taught multisensory ways. They are not taught how to actually teach a child with any kind of a specific learning difficulty. That has to come as a syllabus for the teachers, so that each and every teacher is primed, and there are no special educators, separate ones. If we have each and every teacher who knows a different child will need different ways and means to teach them, then I think it can happen on a very large scale, the change. If we still keep on continuing to have a separate sector of special educators who would work separately in a different room for the child, then I think that separation and that the inclusivity that we want to bring cannot happen. So we have to somewhere hit at a level where each and everybody is trained.
I agree with,
but now I've heard
also that, but my point was that the teachers in the B.Ed are taught to recognize these difficulties. Yes. They are not taught to take care of them, not to manage them, not the different styles of teaching. They are taught only one style of teaching. Blackboard mein likho, kitab mein likho, kitab padho, copy mein likho. Likho, padho, number leke aao. Finish.
So the education, so how we are educating our teachers is also has to change.
So that whole system needs to be changed. One system of education is not applicable for everyone.
Yeah.
But I believe there is work being done in that direction. They are now planning to sensitize all teachers to be special educators. So like what Dr. Himani said, now no more special educators separately, all teachers to become sensitized and, and that's how we move towards an inclusivity.
Yes.
Well, okay, I will just say here, this word special educator, I don't like. Why should be anybody special educator? What is special about teaching with audiovisual aids? No, there's nothing special. It is a form of teaching.
Yeah.
So teach teachers different styles of educating and learning. There's nothing special about it. Don't neither classify children differently nor classify teachers differently. There's a broad range of the things, So I had dyslexia. I still have dyslexia. In my childhood, I could relate to some teachers very, very well. I could not relate to others. Why? There's a difference in style of teaching, the style of connecting with the student. I would follow and I would still kind of, they would idolize those teachers. I still say, fine, they changed my life. Because it
Yes, and the society
Yes.
is moving in that direction. We no longer have special schools now.
Yeah, so that change is required.
We're moving,
We need to get away from this obsession with reading, writing, getting marks. These three things. This obsession has to go away because it does not really help in life too much. It helps
I think
very,
we can
very, very little.
replace these three words with communicating and expressing ourselves, teaching. That's what we want humans to do. To be able to communicate.
So my question to Kavita now. Kavita, the same question to you again, that how to help, let us say, treat these children now?
So I think going with what you're saying, it's not about treating. I think the language we use, I do feel, is very important. You're not treating the children. I think we need to treat ourselves. I think that's one of the biggest things that we are talking about here today.
Yeah.
Who is accountable? Who are we trying to fix? Really? And I think that's the question that needs to be asked repeatedly. Are we talking about teachers? No, we're not just talking about teachers. If they've not been taught, how are they going to do it? Are we talking about doctors? Are doctors being taught? Are psychiatrists being taught? I was not taught about SLD. I was not taught about autism. It's the children who have taught us. How much of pediatricians really, and Himani sitting here, how much of the practice used to be about developmental behavioral pediatrics? It's mostly about physical, organ, and all the different components of pediatrics. So I think I'm going back and taking a step back and saying the hidden parts of us, which are not the body, are in any case hidden. So anything that tries to deal with that has taken and always has taken a backseat because they are hidden. If we are bringing them out, that's one of the ways of treating it. So forum like this or other places where we are talking about what is under the tip of the iceberg is very important. How do we treat this? I can tell you from my experience, the reality still is that these children will come either to a pediatrician or to the principal's office or to the headmistress's office or to the psychiatrist or to a psychologist. They will be brought because there is a question in the family's mind or in the teacher's mind of whether something can be done. The question in most families is not what is wrong with my child. The question really is, if you can identify what is wrong with my child and if there is something wrong with my child, what can we do about it? So I think first of all, framing the question of what can be done and not looking at only a deficit-based model. So I'd like to say here, each child has multiple forms of intelligence. If we are able to treat with this mantra in mind, that a child who comes to me, instead of giving the parent a deficit-based model of this is wrong with your child, if we are able to find the rainbow that tells the parent, this is the strength of your child, this may be something he doesn't do well or she doesn't do well, this is something he can learn more of if taught the right way and finding the right teacher. Problem is not in the child. So if we are able to do all three, that would be the component of treating. And alongside that, I think our role as the adults over here has also become over the years of being an advocate and awareness activist for these conditions. If over a period of time, the number of families that I've seen have taught me something, it is my duty now to promote that and advocate that in others. So I see the treatment as fourfold. I see it as preventive, which is first of all that if this child has landed here with me, can I help them become advocates for 10 other children of the same variety? It also does sometimes run in families. So if they have a second child or a third child, will this parent be empowered enough to deal with this in a different way with their second or third child? So prevention and prevention of any further complication or consequence of this child being having this condition that impacts their learning. They should not go into depression. They should not land up with decreased self-esteem. Can we do something to prevent the secondary consequences? The second part is identification of exactly the profile. And I would say the profile is not just about deficit. It's not just about locating the disorder or the condition that impacts learning. It is also about finding the strengths of that child so that there can be a holistic story about this child. And it should not impact only their problematic. So the child shouldn't grow up with thinking, I am a problem child. It should be located outside that I have this kind of a condition. This will impact my learning of this thing, of reading. That's it. The rest of me has immense possibility. No problem at all. The third part of it is what often in traditional medicine is called remediation, treatment, management, which is now the biopsychosocial model, and in which we say, okay, if this child wants to learn in a certain way, if this family does wish to learn and conform, can we help them fill up those gaps by finding the right remedial person? It could be a teacher, it could be the parent. Oftentimes what happens is that the mother or the father become an expert in education to help their child because they have not been able to locate the right kind of teacher. Often I find that an elder cousin is the one who has taken a compassionate interest and therefore is being able to teach the child. So while yes, we need more people who are educated enough to actually deal with remediation, oftentimes in India, I find that it is the family that actually ends up helping the child far more than a professional. So I do believe that empowering the family is one of the mainstays of treatment in India for us. It is not just about finding the right kind of professionals. There are too many such children and too few institutes that are churning out such professionals. And then the thing is for the child, the last bit of treatment is for the family and the child. Can they, as they grow up, also become advocates and have their own way of saying, it's okay if I'm diverse, I'm still important, I'm still worthy, I'm still an original piece, I'm okay as I am. And if we have such role models as we go on in life, I feel that that in itself is treatment of the society, because right now, all our superheroes, everyone, nobody talks about a dyslexic or a dysrhythmic superhero. Nobody. There are no bits of children's literature. There's everything available. No children's literature talks about a child who can be a hero despite having this. We don't have enough role models who are successful. And I think it's not the reality. There are actually enough superheroes in our world who may have had a specific learning disorder, but are hugely successful and individuals in themselves. And I do believe, Dr. Sanjay, you are one of them.
Thank you very much. And I think maybe the taboo attached with the labeling keeps them away from becoming visible in this society about these issues. So that, next question again to you only, should these kids be pushed to match up with the herd?
So that's an opinion. It's not, I don't think any kid should be pushed to match with any herd.
Is the parents' tendency that कि इसको पढ़ना सिखा दो, इसके नंबर कम आ रहे हैं, नंबर ज़्यादा आने चाहिए?
सबकी टेंडेंसी है. शुड वाली जो बात है वो मुझे नहीं पसंद आती, बिकॉज मेरे हिसाब से ये नहीं होना चाहिए. लेकिन रियलिटी हमारी ये है इस समय दैट वी डू लिव इन अ टाइम ऑफ कंपटीशन. And I don't think it is only about education. I do think it is far more about the larger social construct of what happens after school, after education. If we are going into employment sectors, then the people who are successful as adults, it all goes back from there, because it is about job security. For most parents, it is about, will my child, when they grow up, be in a place where they are financially independent and able to look after themselves, whether it's a boy or a girl or not. And if that is our goal, and if the value in each of these professions is laid on literacy and the use of reading, writing, and arithmetic, what are the top 5 professions which are successful today? They are not of cyclists and pianists and artists. It's just not the culture in which we live right now. Is the carpenter, who does not require reading, writing, but requires a skill set? Are they the most popular? Is this the most popular profession? Is this the more coveted one? No, it is not. Which ones are the most coveted ones? Those 5 all have literacy at their center. And I think the problem boils down to how our society is constructed in terms of its value system. It all boils down to children. And therefore, as a child is growing up, why is education or English-based education so important? Why is Hindi-based education not so important? Because in MNCs, which are the most successful right now, Hindi is not the common language. So I think it is far more about the social construct of how we have developed the value systems in our culture, and the pressure lands on the family. They are not doing something that they intentionally wish to harm the child. I don't think there's any parent I have met who intentionally wishes to harm their child. So when we say the parent is responsible, they are not the only ones responsible. I think we are taking away responsibility from the way that we have predominant discourses in our society about what is success. And I'm sorry I've gone on about this, but I feel this is extremely important. You cannot locate the accountability on the child or the parent or a singular teacher.
Exactly. That is actually, that is the point. That is where we actually need to redefine a definition of success and our measure of the human beings, you know. Is it advisable to seek concession from the government or the adaptations which are provided, and what are the adaptation and benefits which are provided? Gunjan, can you tell us about that?
The answer whether they should seek these benefits, I would say yes, because since they are, you know, they put through the difficulty, at least they can have this advantage. And but the government has clubbed everything into a 5% quota, in which they have put all difficulties together. So whether it is, you know, it is a specific learning difficulty, or it is autism, or it is intellectual impairment, they're all clubbed and put into one. And the difficulty has to be, the disorder has to qualify to be 40% and above to get a government concession. So that is how you get it. And there are government scales they have on which they are going to be, you know, assessment scales by government. And on that, if the difficulty, the disorder is shown to be 40% and above, and then they will get it. And the benefits they get is right now only for school and college admissions and entrance exams. So that is the only benefit right now. For jobs, they are still not, they haven't got any benefits for that as yet. So that is where certification is only for, and also now they are considering entrances for NIT and for NIT and for MBBS. But now after giving that, they're again thinking that whether they should give it for MBBS or no. So, you know, there's a lot of changes happening over there. But I'll just add one thing to what Dr. Kavita said, that, you know, reading and writing in these 5 professions, you know, which require skills for you to read and write. But with the way artificial intelligence is taking over the jobs, you know, the softer skills are coming up for human survival.
So I always say I was kind of successful in fooling the system into this. You know? Otherwise, medicine was far from a dyslexic person to manage to, you know. So now, so dyslexia and all are kind of taken as a minor form of, for minor issues, you know, but more important issues are ADHD. So what is ADHD and how is it managed, Himani?
Yeah, so ADHD is again if you go by biological thing, it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, wherein the child, as we have already discussed, will not be able to sit in one place for long, will be over talkative, would not want to finish his classwork, will get distracted. In a class of 40 minutes, every few seconds, the child would be maybe looking out or want to get up from his seat, or maybe fidgeting in one place. And those are the kind of symptoms mostly the parent would present. And if we go by the diagnostic criteria, then those symptoms which have been written, they have to be present or have to be causing some amount of difficulty in achieving academic goals or in day-to-day activities or in social skills. And if these challenges are persisting in two different domains, like at school also and in home or in a social environment, or they are there for more than 6 months, then we can call it as ADHD. Again, now, how
I'll
do we...
interrupt. I'm sorry, I'll interrupt now. I have seen my experience. All the boys are fidgety, restless, looking here and there,
Absolutely.
and all the girls are more well behaved.
Yeah.
That means, is it a Y-linked disorder?
No. So I'll tell you. So I have a son who's 14 years old now, but he has taught me so many things. So he was always full of energy and always wanted to go here and there. That doesn't mean that the child has ADHD. And when you look at the books and you read all those set of symptoms, you feel, okay, my child is also on the attention deficit. He cannot sit in one place, cannot concentrate. But again, how much is the deficit when it comes to socializing with peer? Is he able to socialize? Is he having a good time with friends? He's not facing any challenges with having friends or with being with the family members around. Is he able to sit through an activity for some time and is able to learn what we want to, again, we come down to boil down to learning. And so basically it's the three domains, maybe academics, social, and occupational, day-to-day activities. If the child is facing problem in brushing his teeth, is not able to brush, is not able to bathe, he knows these three things I have to do every day and keeps forgetting. Hey, oh, main bhul gaya brush karna. I had to, I forgot to take my pencil and sharpener and eraser to the school, or to, if the child has to plan an activity, like if he has to do drawing today, and he has to plan in his mind that I need a pencil, an eraser, some colors, and a page to draw. So this is planning. We are planning in our mind. Then we organize our things, and then we execute the task. So all these three factors, if that is where the child is facing problem, that is when we start taking into consideration the diagnosis. Not every child who's active is hyperactive. Not every child who, see, if the child is not interested in doing an activity, he will be fidgety or she will be fidgety. If you tell me to read a book I don't like reading, I will look here and there. Even till today, you won't believe, I can't study for more than 15 minutes at a stretch. I have to take a break. I can't concentrate for more than 15 minutes. That doesn't mean that I'm also on a ADHD spectrum. So it's important for us to differentiate between what is actually on ground. If I'm not able to plan my routine day, okay, today I have to leave home, I have to do these 3-4 things, and I'm not able to plan, organize in my mind and execute it. That is where the challenge is coming. It can be a very small thing, from brushing your teeth, doing a drawing activity, or doing anything in our routine lives, to a very big task. So that is where we bring in the diagnosis or this kind of a term, because then we want to help the child to be able to learn how to organize. And sometimes if we don't manage, or if we don't help the child, the way that child is parented, again, is very important aspect. What will happen is, if the child is not interested now in writing, or in reading, or doing a particular kind of an activity which a parent wants them to do, and we make the child do that, the child may throw some behaviors, and the parent would be too strict at times, will be too adamant, you need to study right now. This 1 hour is for study and you cannot go anywhere else. So that builds up various challenging behaviors, defiant behaviors. They may either throw something out of anger issues, emotional concerns, and then when they are not able to behave, they're getting scolded every time by the parent, or punished by the teacher to leave the class, stand outside. So those are the secondary factors which then start building up behavioral problems, psychological problems for the child, which can be actually prevented by changing the way we parent, by understanding, giving more acceptance to the child, understanding, and then managing it. I think we can actually curb it down at a much earlier stage if we as parents also learn to modify our parenting styles, we can actually prevent a lot of behaviors and defined behaviors from creeping in with. So this is how I would say.
Yeah, Kavita, your views, Kavita. Yes.
Yeah, just one of the views about the gender thing. I think often people say that ADHD is linked to boys because some of the prevalence ratios also suggest it's a 4:1 prevalence ratio. But I think we are now learning that's not true. It's just that the manifest is different. So a child who is hyperactive and running all over the place, everybody sees. But attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a bit of a misnomer. It is not just about hyperactivity. It is not just about attention deficit. It is about self-regulation. It is about impulsivity. It is about the failure to be able to regulate yourself with the knowledge that you are not being able to regulate yourself. So I think in girls especially, we are often finding that it is missed that they probably have ADD or ADHD because of the hyperactivity component not becoming so obvious. Of course, the girls where the hyperactivity component is there, it is easier to quantify. But where only the attentional and the emotional component is there, we are picking it up in 14 to 18-year-old girls. And there is a lot more literature now about the gender variations because the manifest in girls looks very different. So I just like to put that comment in that we should look for the ADD, ADHD components in girls. It just manifests differently.
So Kavita,
doesn't mean the girls don't need that help.
When do you say it is abnormal and needs something to be done about it?
So again, I don't like the word abnormal. It's different. There are two things. One is if there is the usual routine or occupation of a child of that age. What is that usually? If it is that of being a student, it is that of playing, and it is that of biorhythms, your own sleep cycle, your energy levels, your feeding, toileting cycle, these. So when these three things, the social, occupational functioning that should be for that child, if that is impaired in some way, that is impacted in a way that is adverse for the child, that's one part when we say this child will need more help than just letting it go. The other thing, the other criteria is one of subjective distress. So there are many, many children who will mask their symptoms because of the social image, because of the fact that they don't wish to show the amount of effort it takes for them to contend with this. They are functional, they are able, they are intelligent. They don't want to show how much problems they are having. But subjectively, which means to the child themselves, there is a huge amount of distress. And they are spending hours and hours in the day trying to deal with that distress and making tools. Therefore, some of the other things that a child would do at that age are not being done because they can't do it. They don't have the energy left to do that. So these children who have very high levels of subjective distress, and the other is where there's an obvious dysfunction or an impact on function, adverse impact on function in their usual routine, that's when we actually start looking at treatment. That's usually, in India, at least in my practice, that's usually when they come. Till something has gone wrong in the actual impact, most children will not come. But when we take the history, then you realize that this has been going on for a while, but because either the child is bright, and in our education system, you can study the day before the test, and a bright child can get away with it. So if that is true, and I don't study the entire year, but in the last 3 weeks, I sit down under very, very strict circumstances, I study, I clear the exam, and I go with my short-term memory. That child will not come to us till class 7th or 8th. Till when your systematic learning and the volumes of work has become quite a bit, or when they have started realizing, because that's the time, around that time, that the self-image becomes very important in the preteen, teen age. Developmentally, it becomes very important where the child wants to belong to a group, where the peers become very important. So if that child is not being able to then have sustained friendships because of their impulse control issues, because of the fact that they blurt out things to their friends, they can't keep secrets, or they are very quick to stand up for their friend. So they are the ones who get into the fight, and the teacher finds them because they don't know what the consequence could look like. So a child with ADHD will often, if you take the history, have stood up for somebody else's fight very often, and then gone and told the teacher, "Meri galti thi." Because they're very honest. They are not looking at the consequences. They are not calculating the consequences. So when you start having this, it presents as a behavior problem. If you look behind the behavior problem and take a good longitudinal history, you see the pieces adding up. And that's when usually we say that if it is impacting the social life of the child, if it is impacting the singular story the child is holding. So I ask children, what do you think about yourself? Many of these children will tell me, badmash hoon, naughty, I'm the one who gets into trouble at all times, I'm the class joker or the clown. Everybody looks at me like I'm the person who disrupts the class the most. But I'm the staunch loyalist with my friends. So these pictures of themselves, nalaiki ki jo picture unke dimag mein ban rahi hoti hai, I see that also as a sign for treatment, because that is not treatment of the child. That is the treatment that he's shutting off past possibilities for himself. She is saying, because I'm nalayak, I won't be able to do anything. So what's the point in trying? And you don't want a child who doesn't have a growth mindset at that age. You want a child who's able to explore and feels there are hundreds of possibilities in life. And I think those are the points that I pick up for treatment.
Right.
In terms of definitions,
yeah,
it's the socio-occupational dysfunction and the subjective distress that by criteria we look at. But I think in Indian culture, I do look at the singular story that the child is forming about themselves and the lack of possibility that they are starting to experience. And I would then definitely try and manage.
Yeah. So put it simply, whenever it's harmful for the psyche or the body of the child or for the environment, that is the time that we must try to change or modify their behavior or treat them.
Or when the child wants.
Child wants.
That so I'm not reaching my potential.
It's affecting the psyche. Yeah. It's already affecting the psyche. That means. No?
Got it. Yeah.
So Gunjan, what would you do for to help these kids?
For ADHD?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, educate the parent, because they are the primary person in contact with the child, and they can really help to a great extent, because right from bathing, the child is having difficulty right from getting ready in the morning, coming, and also, completing tasks at home. And they constantly keep hearing, like Dr. Kavita said, irresponsible. हाँ तो मैं तो irresponsible हूँ, so मैं forgetful हूँ, and मैं naughty हूँ. So this is what they actually start believing with those labels. But when it comes to helping these children, we try to tell the parents to expand what is working. And even the teachers, when they're doing so, let's help them with what is working rather than focusing on what is not working. And there will be spurts in which they will be giving us those little windows where they will be telling us that, these are the way I'm going to learn, and these are the activities that I will be better at. So, but we are so consumed with the problem and so consumed with, making them fit into a, एक सांचे में उनको ढालने में हम इतने बिजी हो जाते हैं कि हम ये देख ही नहीं सकते कि वो और बहुत सारे तरीके, बहुत विंडोज वो हमें दिखा रहे होते हैं जो हम एक्चुअली मिस आउट कर जाते हैं. Unfortunately, we have a system, and even the parents' need for my child to fit in is very high. But yes, it is hard, especially with children with ADHD. And also, when it comes to government relaxations, there is no relaxations for ADHD as well. They have for specific learning disabilities, but unless it's a comorbid condition that they have with ADHD, there is a recognition for them in the government, but otherwise there is none. But yes, we do a lot of visual, auditory, depending on the child's learning style. So we do multisensory approach, and we train we design their lessons accordingly. And occupation therapy helps a lot with ADHD children. And like sensitizing the parents, I feel that is what we need to work more on.
Great. So I think it won't be wrong to say कि हम लोग बच्चा पैदा करते हैं, पर हम चाहते हैं कि वो बड़ा होकर रोबोट बन जाए. We try to make a robot out of them.
Absolutely.
At 6 o'clock in the morning, please get activated, go and clean your surface, and get ready and go to school and learn and sit in the class and learn and do all that stuff. And then, all the, so that is the, I think, very paradox of our society, that we don't want them to grow up as individuals, but more as robots, Coming to the next topic that is, again, very important and a more serious one is the autism spectrum disorder. Kavita, please tell us about it. No, what is it and what can be done for that?
Sure. Just before I go into autism, I'm sorry, I'm going to also say that in terms of treatment, ADHD is one of the disorders that there is also medication available.
Right.
So I just wanted to point that out, that there is the possibility of management through medication. Most of the other learning disorders, etc., there isn't, but in ADHD there is.
Mm-hmm.
So there are medications that can benefit. Coming on to ASD, or autism spectrum condition, as I like to call it now. This is my learning. I don't think it is a disorder. I do think that it is a condition. It is a different way that children are wired and become adults. That wiring cannot change. It's not as if that wiring will change over time. Much as my wiring can't change over time, there are things I can learn. There are things I can modify in myself, sometimes by choice and sometimes by the circumstances I'm in. So autism spectrum disorder is the kind of neurodevelopmental wiring or condition where the child right from the beginning is wired differently. So what is the difference? The difference is that most of us know immediately as we are born as a baby that we need to socially connect. So human babies are the one kind of babies in the entire animal kingdom that are born at a time where the baby cannot take care of themselves for a substantial period of time. What does that mean? That most other babies, whether it is calves or it is doggies or whatever, within a few weeks are independent. They know how to seek their mother out, have the milk, and even if they are separated from the parents, they can survive. Human babies can't survive if they are separated, not for a very long time. And in that time, the wiring is such that they will seek out social connect because they can only have a parent or a carer look after them. So the crying right from the beginning is communicative. The actions of the body are communicative. They are to draw socially an adult carer towards themselves. That's the way we are built. This is the innate preset set of skills that we are born with as babies. When somebody is not wired in a preferentially social attraction way, then what is going to happen? That's what ASD is about. So right from the beginning, the wiring is different. The child may not respond to your social smile with a social smile. They are more solitary in nature. They may respond to other things, sensory experiences like looking at light. And the child may be actually playing with their hands in a way that they are attracted to the light and dark pattern much more than the face of the mother. So the social connect or the social preference in terms of ratio is lesser than the sensory preference. And if that be so, everything else builds on that. If you don't pay enough attention because you're not wired to pay attention to social cues, to cues of relationships, to the sound of the mother, then what is going to develop over a period of time is that you're not going to learn so many of the social cues. So it is the wiring is such that the social opportunities where children will learn more of this will also decrease because the way that the child is attending is different. This wiring, as children grow up, becomes more and more obvious in things which require us to look at social connect. So a 1-year-old or 1.5-year-old even child, if they're coming up in or being brought up in a family, that you're not going to leave the child alone. So the child doesn't have to make an effort to draw you in. So the social skills are not in demand. They can be observed or not observed, but they are not in demand. Once the child has grown up and has started walking, looking here and there, and the expected age of language development is there, where the child is calling out to the mother or going out and coming running back to the mother, so that there is a sense of social attachment and reward and reciprocation from the child. That's the age where it actually starts getting diagnosed or picked up by the parents, first of all, where they say, you know, my child's not responding to me. I can't seem to connect to them in the way that usually children connect to. And then comes the age of when they think they're not beginning to speak. So they are not really using language to communicate with us. They don't share what's going on. They don't share the joy as much as my other child did, or as much as I would expect them to. So connection and the social cueing, things like saying bye-bye. So a child learns very, very quickly, even in the Godi by the age of 1, that when somebody leaves, then we do bye-bye. We hold their hand and get them to wave. And very soon the child learns, this is what we've got to do. When the mama says bye-bye, this is what I will do. But many of these children who are developing with ASD as their wiring will not be able to pick this up. So every time you ask the child to say bye-bye, they are not waving. So the non-verbal cues, which is also part of our communication so much, that's not developing in the way. In later years, it looks like the child's not speaking to me, the child's not paying attention to me, they're not understanding relationships, they're not understanding the social context of, if we are going out of the house, why do we have to change our clothes? We should go in the same clothes. If we are inside the house, how should I behave with papa? How should I behave with mummy? So what are these relationships? If I'm playing, am I attracted to others to play, or am I attracted to objects to play? So their sensory systems are also developing in a different way. Often the sensory preferences are there. So that's the other part. The social is not preferred. Therefore, language, communication, relationships, reciprocal, play, all these get affected. But on the other hand, the sensory system may be developing in a very different way, and they may be very, very attracted or preferred towards certain senses. So they may actually look at visual patterns and pay a lot of attention to them and get attracted to them and actually go into them far more. They may spend lots of time looking at patterns or doing things which are patterned in nature, because they are picking up these rhythms in the sensory systems and filtering them in a different way. So a combination of these two major domains as the child grows up is what leads to the manifest. And each child with ASD looks different from the other child, because these two combinations can occur uniquely in a child in different ways. And that's overall. So this is not the definition of autism, but this is the way autism or autism spectrum conditions develop. And we have a certain set of criteria that we use to define. Again, these criteria have changed over the years, and as our understanding has changed, and the sensory part or the sensory preferences is something which is a new addition in 2015 or so. We didn't have so much of it earlier on. It was more about language, communication, and social. But now we know that the preference towards the sensory, certain sensory systems sometimes. And here I'd like to add that it is now believed that it is not 5 sensory systems, there are 8 sensory systems, and that may be a topic for another seminar at some other point in time.
Great, fantastic. Yeah. Gunjan, what would you do for children to help these kids now with ASD?
With ASD, early intervention. We insist a lot on early intervention, because while the child is still learning, is beginning to learn, is beginning to interact with the environment, and acquiring the social skills. So we do a lot of work, and at the age of as early as possible, say as early as 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, we can start. We can achieve a lot of I wouldn't use the word normalcy, but you can say in a way fitting in with the others as it is required. And so to make them as functional as possible, we have a system of if they don't have speech and language, we have a system of showing them pictures as to how they follow their routine. Then there are a lot of play and language therapy that we do with them, so that they can understand ways of communication. So the focus is on helping them to communicate, and so that they are able to also so that they don't feel so frustrated once they're able to communicate what they want. And so that's the main thing. And again, psychoeducating the parents, because they are the ones who are spending most of the time with the children.
Right. Himani, I've heard that a lot of newer drugs which have come up for ASD, and there is some sort of stem cell therapy being touted as therapy for this condition. Now, can you tell about all those things now?
So I think we are having a very good discussion on more of the areas which are going to be beneficial for the child. Yeah. And here I would just make one statement that these there is no single medication which would directly treat the core symptom of autism. Right. If the child with autism spectrum has sleep difficulties, we can manage with the medication. If they have associated ADHD symptoms, we can give them medication. If they have some GI concerns, we can treat the GI concerns. But the core symptoms that we are talking of, the social deficits, the reciprocity, that the communication that we are talking of, all those core symptoms, for those core symptoms, we have no single medication as of now, because we don't know the actual cause. Once we know what is causing that wiring to be different, we may be able to come up with a treatment modality. Similarly, stem cell therapy is not having that much evidence base, scientific evidence base, that we would say that it is going to help. So without enough scientific evidence, I don't think, and where we don't know what is going to really treat the child. So doing something like teaching a child social skills and different ways and means to communicate would actually be much more beneficial than putting the child to a therapy or to a means of treatment which is not researched and we are not sure of. After all, our children are not guinea pigs. We have to be sure of what we are doing when we are talking of intervention modalities for managing them. So, and also when we are talking of autism, the early intervention part, I would want to make a comment here, is that our brain, when it is wiring, those early years when it is wiring, it is very important for the parent. One is a genetic cause, or a genetic, probably a phenotype, or a genetic predisposition, I would say. The child has a predisposition to get those kinds of difficulties. And if the environment that we give them, then those difficulties can be minimalized, or they may not manifest to the extent. So environment right in the beginning, immediately after the child is born, in the first 2 years, when the brain is wiring, is pruning, and those wiring which is getting fixed and pruned into a certain set of neuronal connections in the brain and synapses, those before they fix, if we start intervening, providing them an environment which can actually stimulate them by talking to them, by interacting with them, we can actually minimize the chance or the challenges that they may face later in life.
Now, what is your final take-home message for the parents and the teachers or caregivers for these kids, or for the society on the whole?
So for everyone, for all these conditions, my take-home message here would be, let's be more accepting of every child the way the child is. Let's be more accepting as a society, as individual, not just want the parent to be accepting or the teacher to be accepting, but each and every, even have the reason why we are talking of inclusivity, so that we can have a group of children also who are accepting of another child with some different ways and means of learning. So building a community of inclusiveness, or of treating everybody as same, is very important. So by bringing awareness, by advocating, by helping parents with various parenting ways, because these days we have a lot of nuclear families. Parents do not know how to play with their child also, what all they need to do with their child once a baby is born. So talking a lot on parenting ways, how to play with your child, how to interact, how to respond to their various concerns and challenges, we all can help and become more inclusive, where we will treat each other as equals.
It's very rightly said. It's very, very ironical that we want all the kids to become same, but we don't treat them the same. Yeah. That is the saddest, ironical part. Now, Gunjan, what is your take-home message for all of us?
Yeah, I had once heard about that once in the US, in Los Angeles, when they wanted, they were fighting against smoking. It was very hard for them to control. So they started educating children in schools, anti-smoking. And over the 25 years, they saw that when these children became adults, the smoking problem was quite curtailed. So that's why if we start sensitizing children in schools, when they are really young, when they are playing with each other, at that time, they are not judging as much as when they grow up. So if we start doing that very early in their lives, and then when this population grows up, I think we will be, far equipped and more sensitive to towards these children with different abilities and different needs. Also, I would feel the quotient of empathy will also increase if we, target the children and we start educating, sensitizing teachers and children in school. So they are more, accommodating with their peer group. That, of course, and more awareness, like what you did today, and more of these forums, definitely. I mean, I have learned so much today. Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
Kavita, what's your final message for the society on the whole?
So that's a difficult one, but I will say only one thing, and that is to parents, teachers, everyone. Remember, we have the power, and don't think that you do not have the power. And similarly, your child has a power. They will grow up with that power. There's a huge amount of possibility. So if as parents, we can look as children also as citizens of the world and accord them that respect and right, knowing at every point in time that this is the child who is going to actually grow up and look after the world that we are creating. I think that's the message that I'd like each one of us to have. There is nobody in this world who doesn't have a set of possibilities. So look in what your child can do, not in what they can't do. Look at what they can do and grow from there. All of us have the power to grow.
Great.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay, for such a lovely forum.
Thank you, but please don't leave right now. I'm still not
okay.
done with the thing. So do we have any questions, Manpreet? I'm sorry I could not introduce Manpreet in the beginning, but are there any questions from the audience that we can take?
There were a couple of questions, but as the session was going on, many of those questions were answered.
Right.
So there is just one, which probably is not covered. I'll ask that. So one person on Facebook asked this question: what is life coach concept in addition to the medications in ADHD? Is it important and necessary?
Kavita, why don't you answer this question now?
So this is a new concept. I don't think that for children, there are too many life coaches in India that I am aware of. There used to be life coaches for CEOs of big corporates to help them make decisions. But this is a new concept that seems to have come in. There are many of the skills that we want children with ADHD to start implementing on an everyday basis, because it is believed that if you implement certain skills, then you are able to learn them faster. These are called life skills. These could be skills of organization. This could be a skill of scheduling, time management, all these skills. Now, these are not skills that can be taught through one session in a week. So if for 45 minutes, somebody tells you how to organize your desk, that doesn't translate into doing it every day. So the concept of a life coach or a mentor has become one where somebody is in touch with you every day. And they are trying to work on rehearsal of these skills and implementing them over a period of time. They may or may not necessarily be a psychologist. They may not necessarily be a social worker. There are very few and far between that I am aware of in India. It's a good concept overall. In India, with the kind of culture that we have and the kind of social structures we have, this often ends up being somebody from the extended family. An elder brother, an elder cousin, a chacha ji, a mama ji, this thing. So professional life coaches are hard to come by. And in itself, it is not yet a discipline where there are courses that you can do and become children's life coaches. So it's difficult to sort of say what it is about in India, but this is the actual concept that has come across in the West.
I would put it slightly differently. I think the parents and the teacher, they need more of life coaching rather than kids themselves, because they need to be reoriented now. They need to be, taught to teach in better ways and different ways, and not stick to just one monotonous 3-hour way of learning and teaching. So I think parents and the teachers, they need life coaching more than kids do, because I think parents live less of life, teachers live less of life, and they don't want kids to live the life also. So sorry for this.
I can add there,
yes.
if we have time.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about this, in addition to the medications, behavior modification and parent management training, that's already recognized early on in kids with ADHD. So that's what Dr. Sanjay, you are saying. When we are talking about behavior modification, it's basically how parents are responding to a child's need. So in a way, they are modeling a behavior, reinforcing the positives, so that the self-esteem is maintained. And same with parent management training. I guess they're using more complicated terms and life coaches, but that's the role that teachers, parents, whoever is involved in the caretaking of that person, they are doing. They're supposed to do for the outcome to be optimal.
They're the real life coaches.
They are the real life coaches, yes.
So they need to be prepared to be the ones.
Yeah.
Any more question left, Manpreet?
No. Most of the questions were answered through the course of this.
So I think let me make some final comments. Don't tell your Nemo to climb a tree. Find a Nemo. Tell your Nemo to swim. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. But that is Nemo's job, And Nemo maybe if the Nemo has a one weak fin, just strengthen that part. But don't expect the Nemo to climb a tree and run a race on the land. Let them swim. And
He agrees.
Then yeah, of course, she agreed. No, for
She
parents,
agreed. Okay.
yeah, for parents, first of all, yeah, parents are they can play the most important role in this whole thing. Know your child. Only you can best know your child. No counselor, no teacher will be able to understand your child as well as you can, because you spend 24 hours of the day with them, at least in the early part of the life. Work on his or her strengths. Do not try to identify the weaknesses or measure the weaknesses and work on the weaknesses. Work on the strength. Forget about the outdated rote methods of learning. There are many more new methods which have come up, follow them. Don't insist on writing and reading. There are computers nowadays. There are printers nowadays. In their lifetime, your kids will not have to write for sure. And I can tell you from my personal experience, for last 20 years, I have not written a single prescription. I have only signed the prescriptions now. For last 15 years, I have not signed a check. I do all my transactions online. Why don't I sign this check? Because my signatures don't match with each other. And I don't need to. I don't miss. I write sometimes just for the fun of writing, but I don't have to. I don't miss it in my routine life. And there are now so many multimedia's different ways of learning things. YouTube is a very, very important tool. And when I say YouTube, I don't mean to say that the recorded classroom lessons put on the YouTube. No, not the blackboard, whiteboard style of learning and teaching. But there are so many resources. A lot of kids are learning a lot of things. I've seen my kids learning. I see kids every now and then coming to me as, in my clinic also, that they're learning a lot of stuff from the YouTube. I also learn a lot from the YouTube. So basically, it's not just YouTube, but it's a way of saying that multimedia learning, where the audio visual thing is there, is very, very important tool now. Develop his or her talents, which may be over and above and different from the academic thing. Give them a career direction. Don't exactly choose the career. And yes, the direction can be in the direction where they have strength and where they have the talent. Steer them away from the weaknesses and all. Do not compare. Do not compare, because you did not give birth to a robot. So two robots may be equal, but any two kids are never equal. They're never the same. So never ever compare. Read up and become your child's special educator and healer. Happy Teachers Day to YouTube, because YouTube is a big teacher these days. Believe me, that's a fact. I'm not over exaggerating on this part. And next week, we're going to be having another very, very interesting topic and a very, very important guest. Professor Pradam Shri Ashok Chakradhar has agreed to come on as a guest for the next Sunday's talk. He'll be talking about to us about Hindi Kavita Ka Ras. And another announcement that I'm making right now is that we are starting a fitness-related activity. We have formed a fitness club. It's called TLC Strong, Swift, Sleek, with 9 coaches in that. Kaushiki is leading the team. Kaushiki will be making an announcement very, very soon. So please, stay tuned for that. For some audience who asked about the recording thing, the recording of this session will be available on YouTube, also on our Facebook group, the live chat. There is no mailing list for these chats, but these chats are announced in our group, the live chat. Please join that group, stay part of the group. And I take this opportunity now to thank my esteemed guests, Dr. Kavita Arora, Dr. Himani Khanna, Gunjan Bijlani. Thanks for agreeing and coming on the show and giving us very valuable input and information about these things. Thanks, Manpreet, for helping us on the background. I'm sorry I could not announce your role in the beginning. And so all of you, please be a part of the live chat group. Be actively involved over there. And thank you very much for attending to Resolve. See you next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.